Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Top Research Seminars, and this time it's about prevention and lifestyle, the research theme that we represent within the LUMC. And welcome everyone. Also, a lot of people signed up from outside of the hospital, so we hope for a lively discussion about this very broad theme that we of course believe is at the core of almost everything we do. So I'll just introduce shortly the theme and the what's and the whys. It's a very broad theme, as I said, which connects the hospital and the second and third line healthcare provision with primary care and even the citizens themselves out there in the country like we all are. And it's mainly about very important stuff like diet, physical activity, cessation of smoking and reducing stress, sleep, not to forget, and not just exclusively these themes. It's of course much broader than this, but we see in general that these are the main themes. We try to bring focus into this research theme by having some important studies and strategies in place, and also working together with stakeholders like the National eHealth Living Lab and Lifestyle for Health, which are large platforms in the country, but also students. We really appreciate their input, and one of the main goals indeed is to provide education on prevention and lifestyle. And of course, also in the wider world, we try to connect and bring our messages, and also outside of the Netherlands, by doing a lot of international studies as well. Next, please. So it's about research, education, as I mentioned, and not just the research impact, but also societal and talent development by education and combination of getting the new high potentials in the picture. So we build on the quite excellent reputation of LUMC in this field and try to connect all the research related to diet, physical activity, smoking cessation, stress reduction, and very often this is by means of e-health. Of course, there's many outcome parameters. Let's talk about aging or metabolic disease. It's hard to imagine anything that's not connected. But in the end, the goal is to strengthen our collaborations between departments, but also outside of the hospital. So it's very much looking outward. That's to say, within the LUMC, we collaborate with many other themes like neuroscience, cardiovascular, immunity, medical genomics, oncology, and national collaborators like Diabetes Foundation, TNO, healthcare insurers, and ministerial bodies. But as I said, LUMC is also an important initiator of, for instance, the National eHealth Living Lab, which is very well connected, and Lifestyle for Health, which is at the core of this research theme. Next. So it's open for questions. Also, in between the talks today, we have question time, and please reserve your questions for that moment. This is a live session now, so we can interact directly. And also at the end, we have a couple of minutes to talk about this important theme. So I hand it over to Mariette Boon, who is one of the leads, who will present the next talk.
So thank you, Niels, for this introduction on our theme indeed. We will now proceed with the program. And the first speaker is Jorrit Meesters. He's a physiotherapist and movement scientist, and he works as a researcher at the LUMC, Basalt, and the Hague University of Applied Sciences. Since last year, he is appointed Professor of Rehabilitation and Technology there. His ambition is to innovate rehabilitation care to enable patients to receive the best possible care with use of e-health technology. And today he will tell us more about this exciting topic. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mariette, for your kind introduction. Are my slides visible and am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Then I will start the presentation. Thank you very much for the invitation to tell you a bit more about the use of e-health in rehabilitation. And indeed, I am working as a lecturer or professor in applied sciences in the Hague University of Applied Sciences and Basalt Rehabilitation Center. And my main focus is on research in rehabilitation and technology. So with my group, we do research within several teams regarding e-health in rehabilitation, First, how you can use e-health to support the clinical care process, so the clinical rehabilitation process, but also how can you use e-health to support a healthy lifestyle of patients in rehabilitation. And in that lifestyle domain, we mainly focus on physical activity. So rehabilitation is mainly about optimizing participation. Participation means participating in society, doing your work, having a family role, performing leisure activities after a disease or an accident, for example, after having suffered from a stroke. And also about optimizing self-management of patients. And rehabilitation is usually provided by health professionals like physical therapists, occupational therapists, psychologists, social workers. And if it's provided in a team in a rehabilitation center, it's led by a physician, a rehabilitation physician. And we know that the rehabilitation is very effective, but we also know that if we add e-health components, even improves better in terms of better self-management and better access to care, and also higher dosage of intervention, which is very important because we know that it's very hard in rehabilitation treatment to reach the dosage that is recommended in the clinical guidelines. And e-health also supports the monitoring of patients, so you can have insight in the individual progress of the patient, but also to collect data to say something about the group level. Some examples of e-health that we used will become more clear in the course of this presentation are, for example, exercise apps for physical exercise or for cognitive exercise. We use health sensors, for example, for tracking physical activity behavior, but we also use serious gaming to make the treatment more challenging and more fun for patients. First, I have to say something in the collaboration in which we work. We really work from the clinic. So it means that we work in the LUMC, for example, for the Department of Physical Therapy or with basalt rehabilitation. And in the projects that we do, if not with e-health and technology, we also work closely together with the LUMC, of course, in which we try to find out what the effects and outcomes are of treatment in rehabilitation with using e-health and technology. But the strength of our collaboration is that we also have the applied research approach, which is typical for the University of Applied Sciences, the HBO. In the HBO, we are very strong at looking at the problem and the problem definition, and also find out what are the best possible solutions for patients, and also involve the users and the patients in the design process. So we think that is a very strong point for our research group, and it makes it possible for us to work on development, implementation, evaluation of e-health, and that goes hand in hand. And I won't go in too deep, but in this process, we use the CERES roadmap, which was developed in the University of Twente, and it really gives you a good hand in making those development, implementation, evaluation go hand in hand together, and it provides a toolkit to do so. So I advise you to look into that if you are not familiar with it yet. Well, looking at what we do in this triangle, we do a lot of co-creation projects. In, for example, some of our living labs that we have. And a living lab is a place in a clinical care setting in which you have the possibility to really try out and develop things with patients and with companies. So we help the companies to develop innovations that are really helping patients. And you can also, in this living lab, have health professionals, and you can help them to use the actual e-health in their daily practice. And of course, there are also researchers involved who follow the process very carefully. And last but not least, also from my job as a lecturer, it's very important to involve the students and the lecturers. And why is this so important? Because these students, they are the health professionals of tomorrow. So what we try to do is to educate the health innovators of tomorrow in our projects. This is a very busy slide. I will go shortly through it. In this living lab, we are working with virtual reality and gaming companies to develop a virtual reality training traffic game. What we have is a project in which we try to enrich the physical environment within and outside the rehabilitation center to make it much more appealing for patients to be more active. We have portals that we develop, which I will notice a bit later. We also have serious gaming opportunities for patients to work with. We have a living lab in which home automation to support patients in their home situation can be tested with a health professional by patients. We work along with others to, for example, the app Ommetje, make it possible for the patient rehabilitation to work with it. We have all kinds of events in our living labs with students, with companies, and if possible, with all stakeholders together to make this process of innovation and also implementation much more a co-creation process. Before I head to some of the projects that I want to present to you, I have to show you a bit about the typical patient journey in rehabilitation, which is a very short description of it. You have to realize that most patients in rehabilitation start in the hospital and then go to an in and or outpatient rehabilitation facility, and eventually patients from that rehabilitation facility go home. There are also some patients who bypass this in and outpatient rehabilitation process. So what we do in all the projects, we try to serve as many of these parts of the care pathway in our projects. And we also try to find out these critical transitions that are these arrows in this picture, how technology can support to make those transitions a bit more smoother. The first project that I want to discuss with you is the FLITS project, which is about applying innovative physical therapy to improve the physical activity during hospitalization, which is very important because we know that as soon as patients come into the hospital, they start lying on the bed, and that has all kinds of negative consequences. The aim of this project was to reduce sedentary behavior after transplantation or vascular surgery. And it's really about, you see these two pictograms, being in the hospital and afterwards heading home. Well, in the FLITS project, which was conducted by the Department of Physical Therapy with the departments I just mentioned, we performed a pre-post implementation pilot study, and we gave an intervention to patients, which comprised, among others, of an exercise app, VisiTrack. It's a company which we work a lot together, and it's a very large company worldwide operating, and it supports patients and health professionals in providing physical exercises. And since we work so close with them together, we have a good connection, so we can add our exercises that we want in their application. We also developed exercise movies, which we provide via YouTube, but also via the hospital television. We provide a patient with a Fitbit, digital information about the importance, but also the opportunities of being physically active in the hospital. And we also had a board alongside the bed of patients. And in one glance, for example, the doctors in the morning visits, they can see the physical activity status of a patient, and they can use that as a starting point for discussion. And we measured physical activity by using an accelerometer as an outcome. And what we saw in our study is that in the intervention group, we were able to have them 41 minutes less sedentary than the controls on the 6th day of the hospitalization. So we were very happy with that. But we also measured afterwards, in the first week after discharge, there were no differences. So everybody just started picking up their own physical activities, and there were no differences seen anymore. And we also noticed that most of the patients are using several elements, so it's important to have an intervention that suits everybody's needs and patients can pick from. Well, we were happy with the results of the study, but we were not so happy that we were not able to maintain an active lifestyle in patients. So we are very happy to do a next step with FLITS, with the thoracic surgery department. We are currently preparing that, and where we can start using FLITS 2.0 in combination with the box. And why are we so happy? Because there are, as you can see in the right on the pictos, there are several moments where patients go to home after, for example, a clinical setting or rehabilitation phase. And we are in this project very much aiming on also maintaining physical activity at home. That means that we have a workbook for physical activity behavior based on action planning, which we first developed for rheumatic diseases, and we make it also for the population who had open heart surgery. So the aim of this project is first, of course, to stimulate physical activity and also to maintain physical activity. but also to make the care process, which is very well structured for these patients, more uniform by also using technology, for example, the parts that I mentioned before in FLITS. And we also want to collect long-term follow-up data in this project. So this is a good example of how we started something with the Department of Physical Therapy and the Department of Transplantation Vascular Surgery, and now extended to other departments within the hospital. Project that we did within Basalt in our rehabilitation center is the Fast at Home project, in which we use e-health to support the rehabilitation process after a stroke. And our aims were to develop a user-friendly e-health portal with off-the-shelf applications. So we are not manufacturers. What we are doing is that we are using what's best available in the market, and we start working together with these developers to make it as good as possible for the stroke population. And we implemented it in routine care, and also we evaluated the outcomes, but also the process and the implementation of the project. And there were two PhD students involved in this project, and the latest one, Barbara, she finished her PhD in May 2021. And this is really about rehabilitation center, as you see, and people going to home. So what we do in this project, we did a lot of studies, but we also did a pre-post implementation comparison by using prompts. And we gave patients the portal alongside conventional treatment. So we didn't take anything away. We just added something to the treatment, because we know that it's very hard for patients to actually reach the recommended intensity. So we used the platform for that. And if you look into the results, we only saw some differences between the controls and the intervention of 3 to 6 months post-stroke. And they were improvements in stroke impact on communication, memory, strength, and meaningful activities in favor of the intervention groups. But they were rather small, and we also expected some improvements in the early stage, 0 to 3 months, but we didn't observe them. We have some we think we know why that is, but it goes too far for this presentation. But luckily, we also did a lot of other studies. For example, a good process evaluation in which we looked in what patients used and what patients preferred. We also took the user perspective on e-health, but also barriers and facilitators regarding the use of e-health of the rehabilitation professionals, but also the patients into account. And which was also interesting, we work closely together with the Brazilian network of rehabilitation hospitals, that we also compared which barriers and facilitators the different health professionals experience. And we noticed that the Dutch are much more worried about the patient, whether they can use it, and the Brazilians were much more worried about the support by their institution. Well, we also went further with Fast at Home. So we had a set funding from Zon en Wee, in which we upscaled Fast at Home 2.0, and we made a new platform. It's called Ik Oefen Zelf, I Exercise Myself.nl. And it's really about this project improving the web portal and also making more applications available for patients. And we also wanted it to be available for first-line physical therapists. So this is typically a project in which we try to smoothen the transition from the one part of the care chain to the other part. And in this project, we continuously evaluate the process and the outcomes, of course. And it's interesting about this project is that also other rehabilitation centers are interested in working with Ik Oefen Zelf, and they started working with Ik Oefen Zelf. So that's one part of the upscaling. But also is that we saw interest from the Department of Neurology within the LUMC, and now we are working towards the pilot in the hospital phase to see what parts of the Ik Oefen Zelf.nl platform are also feasible for starting in the hospital. So that's something that we want to combine again with the Neurobox, and we look very much forward to setting these steps. And the final project that I wanted to mention is something that we are just starting up at this moment. It's called Basalt on the Move. So this is something that's really in the rehabilitation center with an extension to patients being more active at home. And what we do in this project is that we try to bring everything that we already developed, innovations, interventions, and also trajectories that we have for our patients to keep on being active together in this program. It's a 6-year research program. We also include 2 PhDs, and we have funding from the Friends of Basalt Foundation. And it's about a healthy lifestyle for all of our patients throughout the entire rehabilitation process. So that means everybody gets a personal physical activity profile and a support program. And it's very much based on the behavior change wheel on the right. And everybody gets a personal advisory trajectory, which we have. We have what we call Loketten for exercise and sports, and patients can go there and they can get support so that they can continue being active in their home situation. And we also have the possibility to do long-term monitoring. And last but not least, we want to make the facilities much more exercise friendly, much more appealing to be more active, because we know that a lot of our patients, they go to their rooms after their treatment, and we want to have much more buzz for physical activity in our center, and we have a living lab for that as well. So in summary, I presented a selection of our research projects, which are really all in all parts of the care pathway. And the projects are to optimize care, but also, and very important, to optimize lifestyle of our patients. And we look to in what is needed, which is more the applied research approach, and also what works, which is more the academic approach. And in our projects, we try to look very pragmatic and see, if possible, how we can support our treatment with e-health and with technology. So changing lifestyle rehabilitation is very challenging because a lot of our patients, they experience all kinds of barriers to be physical active and also to remain physical active. But it's a high urgency because a lot of our patients, they have all kinds of diseases for which they have rehabilitation treatment that are really influenced by lifestyle factors. We work in co-creation in a real-life setting in our living labs and field labs, and that makes the outcomes in our projects very relevant and also easier to implement in daily care. But that means that we have to give up some of the control that you have in a very controlled environment for research. So that's something that that's constantly we are aware of, and that's challenging for us. And last but not least, we have projects with high potential for collaboration. Either we can participate in projects with other departments for physical activity, or we can include the perspective of other lifestyle factors within our projects. And as I mentioned before, development, implementation, evaluation, it is something that we would like to incorporate as much as possible. And you can see that in all of these fields, we were able to produce all kinds of output for our projects, but also scientific outputs. I just wanted to mention that as well. And we work together with a lot of people. So I didn't mention any names, but that was actually on purpose, because if I would have forgotten so many people. So from this place, I would like to have a sincere thanks to all the people we work with so closely together. And I hope that we can continue this and extend this for the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jorrit, for this very excellent presentation where you presented a number of projects in a nutshell. We found that the chat function doesn't work, so if anybody has a question, probably you better raise your hand, then we can unmute you and the question can be raised. I see a hand raised from Anne Stichelbout.
We are trying to unmute you now.
I am unmuted. Please, Anna.
Info to prevention at lumc.nl, wasn't that meant to be the replacement of the chat then? Well, anyway, my question was about excellent talk, Jorrit. It's a great series of studies, beautifully done. We are trying to do research on value-based healthcare, and we struggle with this living lab design, and you mostly seem to have pre-test, post-test studies. And I was wondering if you have difficulty publishing papers because they're uncontrolled or even unrandomized, because most seem to be uncontrolled pre-test, post-test. Mm-hmm. Did you encounter any difficulties there in publishing?
Well, our studies are published, so eventually not. But what we see is that what is very important in the projects that we do, I think the journals for rehabilitation also understand that, is that we have a very good insight in the people who did not participate or who were not responders. So all these things that you encounter in these clinical studies, which are uncontrolled, we try to describe them as thoroughly as possible. And sometimes, well, we try to also include some chapter of a process rehabilitation, of a process evaluation, how it works in clinical practice. But it's hard, and it's also challenging for us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. For the sake of time, we have to go on to the next speaker.
Yeah, and it's
Mariette.
good to mention that the general questions can be sent to the email address info.prevention@lumc.nl. So regarding our team, not regarding this seminar. I think
So discard mine.
Yeah, but thank you for noticing. So our next speaker is Niels Chavan. He's family physician and professor of e-health applications in disease management. He's also visiting professor at the Respiratory Research Institute at Fudan University in China and head of research at the Department of Public Health and Primary Care at the LUMC. He's one of the founders of the National e-health Living Lab. He published over 300 articles, joined over 60 committees, and he's currently, as you noticed, one of the board members of our research team. He will now give a talk on Perfect Fit and Stop Coach, studies on tackling smoking and promoting exercise. And I will share the screen now to show the presentation. So can you see it now?
It's not on the starting slide, I think.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Good. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to talk about smoking and exercise, which is a fascinating combination, of course, but I'll elucidate on that. If you can go to the next slide. Yes, so it's quite tangible during COVID what happens with exercise and behavior. For instance, the infamous nicotinic hypothesis by some colleague in France that suddenly tried to frame a possible effect, a positive effect of nicotine on COVID disease trajectories. And luckily, our group and several other groups demystified this myth. Anyways, last weekend in NRC, we saw that there was quite some iffiness around those researchers that are promoting nicotine. Just to illustrate how tangible this topic is. Next, please. So first, to start with the Stop Coach, which is, I think, an excellent example of how we try to reach also the people with lower socioeconomic positions. Of course, we know that in that category, most smokers can be found, and this stark contrast has only increased during COVID. So we're seeing an increasing gap in morbidity, mortality, largely due to smoking behavior. And we found this study from the University College London about the Stop Advisor, which was a website. It looks a bit outdated indeed. But nevertheless, they showed the effect of this website, Stop Advisor, was strongest in the people with low socioeconomic position. So that's quite encouraging. And we contacted the researchers and decided to do this in our own country using, of course, an app. Next, please. So what we decided together with our team members, Pharos, which is the expertise center for health differences, and Trimbos Institute for verslavingsgeneeskunde, addiction medicine, we developed a new app, the Stop Coach, which was especially tailored towards those people with low socioeconomic position, and made use of behavioral medicine techniques to make so there's a bit of fuzz about the screen, techniques to influence behavior, and yeah, If you go to presentation mode, yep, thank you. This is very annoying, actually. We developed this together with patients themselves, and also now it's gone completely.
I will share it again.
Yep, please. It's not showing.
Can you see it now?
No. Yeah, now it's showing again. So I just prefer to keep it this way. So we did some interviews with participants, and what's really striking is that people said at least someone thinks I'm doing well. And actually, this was the virtual coach, so it wasn't a real person; it was an algorithm. And another participant said, "You're doing this with your coach, although." If it's something virtual, still saying that you're doing well, that was already helpful. So it shows that people really are supported, especially in those circumstances where usually there's very few people that gives them the necessary support to keep up the better behavior. Next, please. So we also looked at the actual real-world proof of concept study. It was performed all over the Netherlands in several municipalities, and we saw that almost 50% of app users could continue using the app after the first phases, and no less than 1/3 of app users attempted to quit, which are really encouraging numbers. If you click again. But this was in combination with a professional smoking cessation counselor coach. So we showed again, as in many other e-health studies, that the concept of blended care or hybrid healthcare, where you have real humans supported by technical solutions, is the best intervention in most cases. So this led us to the next study. Yeah, next slide. Where we did a controlled design. It's still ongoing. It's an effectiveness trial where we make use of Cinefuma, which is the largest provider of smoking cessation services in the Netherlands. And we compared this with the app, the Stop Coach app, plus the control condition. Please click again. And this study will show us what the net effect of the app will be on top of the best practice of Cinefuma. So this study is ongoing, and when it will be successful, it will lead to a rollout of the app over the whole of the Netherlands. Next, please. Which leads me to the next study I wanted to discuss for the sake of time. This was an NWO data to person study, large study that was granted to us after a long process as it goes, because we connected, as I started this presentation with, the smoking behavior with sedentary behavior. So not exercising plus smoking. Maybe the most exercise was actually lighting your cigarette. Yes, click on, please. Of course, this leads to a much higher risk of cardiovascular events. The whole study is about these two main risk factors for cardiovascular disease, their interactions, and how we might influence those two important pillars, which surprisingly almost never have been researched in concordance. Next. Yeah, click on, please. Yes, so what it's all about is that we don't want to raise our index finger and tell them that they are behaving badly. No, you want to do this in a much more sophisticated way by trying to persuade people to change their self-image. So instead of accepting that nothing will be changed at all in future, it needs to be changed into I want to become an active non-smoker. So that is quite interesting, and it builds further on earlier research by my colleague Dr. Eileen Meijer, who couldn't make it today, so that's why I'm doing this presentation. Click on, please. So those two behaviors, more exercise and stopping smoking, that's what we're going for, but that's of course quite a task, quite ambitious, and I'll show you how we aim to reach that goal. Next, please. So it targets the key factors of cardiovascular disease, and combining physical activity and smoking cessation can actually also work in conjunction, because by taking on physical activity, the need to light a cigarette could go down, and of course by smoking less, activity is easier to perform. So this could be quite a synergistic effect. And what we aim for is personalized coaching in a much more sophisticated way than through the Stop Coach, what I showed you before, but really persuading people on a lot of different variables, adapting to progress, personal goals, identity patterns, and of course adapted according to this persuasive profile, so that people actually feel like when we're navigating our cars towards a destination, we take the wrong turn, and then the TomTom or the Google Maps will tell us, you can now take a detour, which also brings you at the destination. So it's much more sophisticated, and as I told you, Eileen Meijer wrote a thesis about the fundamentals of this way of trying to persuade people. Next, please. And this means that we have a lot of different topics to cover. The future self is the concept coined in the thesis by Elina. Very important, people change their long-term goals, that they can actually change themselves, of course supported by medication and coping strategies, and of course a lot of underlying research parameters. Next. And the motivation for people to keep this up, helped along by short-term goals, by performing activities and getting feedback from that, and reflecting on this, helped by the newly developed algorithm. Please click on. It's all about finding balance. So of course, people should not overtrain. We know this from a lot of earlier studies on fitness, that it's really about very balanced variables, about tissues, about biomechanics, about running gait, etc. And we have a lot of data on this. Because we collaborate with strong partners in this consortium, we can build on a lot of earlier studies, so we can really fine-tune this into a new system. Next, please. And this system architecture looks a bit like this. We of course have a database, and we have smartphones to connect people with our system. We are building on this virtual coach that includes algorithms on physical activity already there. And we use a lot of sensor information to make this really individual. If you click on. So it really builds on the combination of a lot of data sources, including external sensors, especially for running, which is the best term of activity that we have most data and data points on. But we also combine with many other inputs like step counts and activity classifications for other sports. So really this is all about different types of sports according to what people are inclined to take on. But for running, we have the best possibilities. Next. And this is how the first prototype looks like. For instance, what goal would you like to set? Well, I'd like to be able to run for 30 minutes without stopping. So would you like to set a weekly goal, or is it long term? And then you get encouraged by, of course, the famous thumbs up. But it really goes much deeper than this. And the aim is to make this feel like a personalized coaching system, much better than we have today. Next, please. Just to outline the work packages of Perfect Fit, of course, we have the very important data collection and generating the database advice. Please click. That's for TU20. Then we have what works for whom, targeted health behavior change at the University Leiden. Then we have intelligent interaction, computerized coaching, that's Delft. And then we have the experimental proof of concept studies and the requirements to bring the innovation to the market. And that's actually LUMC and NEL. Of course, these are only the university partners. If you click on, there's many more partners from public and private directions, and also healthcare insurers and the Harteraad. So patients are involved from the start. And we think this will really be interesting to see those important lifestyle elements to lead to much better cardiovascular disease control. Next, please. And that's my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niels, for this very interesting talk. We have seen that the chat is in the meanwhile working, and while we are looking at the chat, I was wondering, you showed us an intervention combining smoking and sedentary behavior, and I was wondering, is there a limit to the number of lifestyle behaviors you can address at the same time? Can you, for example, say I want to be an active non-smoker with healthy eating habits?
Yeah, so that's next level. Great question, Thea. Thank you. I realized that will be quite complex. So we start with these two, which are actually the main risk factors for cardiovascular. And if this succeeds, if we manage to get a working system that actually helps people, the idea is to add indeed more risk factors, so we get a much preciser prediction of risk. But we thought that just starting by these two big ones was already quite a game changer, but we're looking forward to add many more.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any questions from the chat? Yeah, there's a question coming. Maybe you can...
Yes, a question from Hongxia Shen. Are there any difficulties that were experienced during smartphone use by people, such as non-traditional e-health users, and how did the research team cope with it?
Yes, so no doubt there will be a lot of logistical issues. That's always the case. But luckily, we tried this, of course, in a much simpler form with the Stop Coach, actually aiming at people who are usually not targeted in e-health studies, so people with lower social economic positions. So we are a bit experienced in how to reach these people, and the interface that we're building, I only showed you the back end, all the complicated stuff that's needed to get it up and running, but the front end, the interface will be tailored to the needs of, let's say, very lay people, so that it's understandable and attractive even for people with lower socioeconomic position.
Okay, thank you. Niels, a barrier that we sometimes see when introducing these apps is that healthcare providers are a little bit reluctant. They are afraid that they will not be needed anymore in the future. On the other hand, we see that adherence increases when healthcare providers promote the use of technology. How do you see the role of healthcare providers in the future?
Well, yes, excellent question. As a family doctor myself, I'm only happy when people are encouraged to change their behavior towards the good, because I really put a lot of energy into talking with people about this. So I'm not afraid of losing my job. There's only more work because we are very successful in keeping people alive and accumulating their chronic diseases and risk factors. So there will be a mer à boire in my best French. And I'm really not afraid of this. Actually, we should recruit patients to be part of the team instead of telling them they cannot do anything.
Okay, thank you. We see that there's one hand raised. Anna Stichelbout, is this a new question?
I just wanted to comment that the chat only works for guests and not for LUMC people. So you should ask people to raise their hands also if they're from LUMC.
Okay, thank you for the tip. I think we can go on to the next speaker.
For the sake of time, we continue indeed with Liesbeth van Rossum. I'm very happy to announce her all the way from outside of the LUMC. Liesbeth is endocrinologist and professor obesity and stress in the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam. She's one of the founders of the obesity clinic Centrum Gezond Gewicht. She's president of Partnerschap Overgewicht Nederland and as such was closely involved in including the combined lifestyle intervention in our basic health insurance. She co-authors over 150 scientific papers. She has received several prestigious grants, including a VD grant, and was awarded several times for her research. She's also one of the authors of the international bestseller Vet Belangrijk. And today she will talk about obesity, lifestyle intervention, and the immune system. So the floor is yours. So I see your presentation, but I cannot hear you yet. Let me see if we have to unmute you.
Maybe it works better.
Yes, I can hear you now, and we see your slides. So you can start.
Thank you so much for this very nice introduction, Maria Boon, and for organizing this whole seminar, also for the nice presentations of the former speakers, also the introduction of Niels Javan and the other organizers of the LUMC. I think it's a terrific afternoon with nice prevention and health lifestyle presentation. I enjoyed it already. So my topic of today will be obesity, lifestyle and immune system. These are my disclosures. Let's see whether it's working. No. Yes. Well, at present, more than half of the adult population is overweight in the Netherlands. So 50% overweight and 15% has obesity. We are often talking about weight, BMI above 30 is obesity, but basically the most important thing is we are talking about too much fat. And then it's important to realize that fat is an active organ. It's producing hundreds of hormones and also inflammatory factors, and also has a lot of mechanical effects. And we should realize that obesity is basically a disease of fat mass. Because when you have too much fat, there are a lot of disturbances in these hormones and inflammatory factors. Well, here you see some of the hormones, for example, when on the left you see the normal fat mass, and on the right you see the dysfunctioning of this organ fat. For example, when you have too much fat, we see that the fat becomes more pro-inflammatory, pro-thrombotic, pro-atherogenic, but also there's endothelial dysfunction. And this happens not only in obese, but also when you have an unhealthy lifestyle and have a chronic hypercaloric diet, which many patients or persons have in current Western diet style. Well, the leptin and adiponectin are really important adipose tissue hormones, with adiponectin, which is often low, is decreased in obesity, and it has many anti-inflammatory effects, so it's protective. So when it's low, it's bad. The opposite is true for leptin, because that it's high in obesity, and it has many pro-inflammatory functions. So looking at obesity as an active organ, you can realize that it can be sick, just like a heart or liver can be diseased. It can be sick and needs treatment. And another important aspect of obesity is that we call it a gateway disease. We know that about 230 complications have been described of obesity. And the most common we know, of course, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, but also 13 forms of cancer. So about 20 to 40%, for example, of the breast cancer types is obesity related. Also depression. This inflammation is not only present in the fat, in the adipose tissue, but also at the brain level, for example. And infertility can be the consequence, joint complaints, also immune function, I come later to that, and many psychosocial consequences. We know that obesity, there's still a large stigma. People are being told, eat less, move more, and the problem is solved. And the thing is that it's way more complex. I come back to the role of lifestyle also in obesity later. But first, let's have a look at obesity and how weight is being regulated. Well, when we look to the normal situation, we have a specific amount of fat mass, which can be normal and is producing normal amounts of leptin, and leptin is signaling to the brain, to the hypothalamus, which is a regulatory area in the brain, and it basically tells our body how much fat is present. It's like a weight scale, but then specific for fat mass. So how much fat mass is present in the body. And then, then the hypothalamus receives the signal by the leptin receptor. And in the hypothalamus, signals are being sent to the periphery to reduce our food intake and to increase metabolism. Well, so far, so good. But now when you, for example, this system is really important because when you don't have, for example, a leptin receptor or you don't have a proper working leptin, then this is the result. This is one of our patients, Megan, and she's older right now, but she approved to share her story. When she was age 2 years old, she already had a BMI of 38, so she had obesity at that early age. She also had an extreme appetite, so hyperphagia. And as you can see, she's the only one in her family who has severe obesity. And those are the 3 alarm symptoms actually in general to think of a monogenetic obesity when a person has an early onset of obesity, hyperphagia, so extreme appetite, never feeling full, and the person is the only one in the family. So you can see this leptin is really, really important in physiology. So this was a rare example, but now back to obesity. What is happening in obesity? We know the amount of fat mass is increased. Of course, more of the leptin is being produced, but at brain level, the receptor is resistant because there's inflammation, not only in the fat mass, but also in the hypothalamus, and the leptin signal is not being sensed very good in the hypothalamus. The consequence is that this really beautiful system of reducing your food intake and increasing your metabolism is being disturbed, and that promotes weight gain. And now you can understand that obesity is a chronic relapsing disease. Once people have been living with obesity ever, the body always wants to go back to the higher weight. The body sort of becomes reprogrammed to become obese again. So when you lose weight, the body always will try to get up the weight. So therefore, lifestyle is really essential, but you have to do more than, for example, the exercise guidelines. And so it costs a lot of more effort. That's really important to realize. And sometimes lifestyle is not enough. So what does obesity has to do with the immune system? Well, very recent example, of course, we had the COVID epidemic, and we saw on the ICU that almost 80% was overweight, 37% has obesity, which is by far more than in the population of which we said 50% has overweight. And well, in England, we saw that the Prime Minister had also suffered from overweight, ended at the ICU unit, and he did a call for better lifestyle, more measures to improve lifestyle in the population level, which was an important signal for people to know that lifestyle is really important and that overweight and obesity is really a problem. Now, how does obesity lead to more severe infections? Well, first of all, there are many causes of obesity. Of course, lifestyle factors are the most important one, but it's important to realize there are other factors which can also cause obesity. Once you have obesity, then many comorbidities can exist, and they can lead to more serious cause of COVID, but also COVID-specific alterations exist which collapse actually together because in COVID, we know there's an increased thrombosis risk, and adipose tissue can function as a viral reservoir. So you're more prone to have more of viruses in general, but also of the COVID, for example, of the coronavirus. So through all these mechanisms, we know you can have a more serious course, but also really important is that the immune system plays a major role in this whole system. So it's really important that you treat obesity really as a disease. Now, how can you treat it as a disease? Then first you have to diagnose what's the cause. Well, it's good to realize there are 6 main categories of causes, and I won't go into detail in this slide. You can find it back on partnerschapovergewicht.nl, and look at aanpak overgewicht. You can read it back. But, well, for example, sometimes mental factors can play a role, binge eating disorder, depression. In medication with a potential weight-gating side effect can induce weight loss or can impair the effects of a lifestyle intervention. That is really common, actually. And we found in a study in our patient with obesity in the Erasmus Medical Center that about half of the people with obesity was using at least one or more medications with a potential side effect of increasing your weight. Then we have hormonal factors, also not only the appetite hormonal factors, but also like thyroid function, PCOS, hypogonadism, but also more common factors like pregnancy or postmenopausal status can all contribute to weight gain. And then category 5 and 6, hypothalamic and monogenic, is more rare types. So when we look at the lifestyle type of obesity, and that is not only the food, which is of course a very important factor, especially in our obesogenic environment with supermarket, with 3/4 of the products selling unhealthy food, but also sometimes sleep deprivation, increase your hunger hormones, timing of the meal. So if you eat very late at night, that matters. Alcohol use, social cultural background, all can contribute, and also social factors can be really important. For example, if a person has financial problems or poverty, then the attention to lifestyle is not so good. So lifestyle is a very common obesity cause, unhealthy lifestyle. Then how we treat in the current national guidelines is step 1 is lifestyle intervention. And new in the basic insurance are the combined lifestyle interventions. So it's not only going on a diet, but it's behavioral modification by coaching, by personal coaching on healthy eating pattern, healthy exercise pattern, but also for example, attention for food or for sleep or for stress. So the whole life is being coached to reach a healthier weight and also be fitter in general. And then if adjunct therapies can think of pharmacotherapy or bariatric surgery. But the immune system is playing a role in this whole story. Now, you are probably aware of the 3 steps of the immune system, and the major steps is that first, the innate immune system is responding in general to viruses or bacteria, and step 3 is that the adaptive immune system is responding. Both are very important for a proper immune system. But now we know in obesity, we know that the immune system is way more active. And we did a study on that in our obese patients, and we found that the T cell activation, so which is shown here on the left, is much more active in people with obesity, but also the macrophage activation, which is more active in people with obesity, and especially more active also in people with obesity and the metabolic syndrome. So that's not new. We know there was a hyperactivation for the immune system, which means you cannot respond that well anymore to defense bacteria and viruses in general, and it also accounts for the coronavirus. But the good news is here, when we did a combined lifestyle intervention and they lost only 5 to 6% of their weight, we did a combined lifestyle intervention including cognitive behavioral therapy, so a CLEAP Plus actually. We see after 10 weeks already, we saw improvements of both the innate immune system, but also of the regulatory T cells. So that's good news. And after more than a year, so 1.5 years after start, they further improved. They maintained their weight loss and they further improved with respect to the T cell activation and the regulatory T cells. So to summarize, we saw an improvement after 10 weeks and even further after 1.5 years of their adaptive immunity. But also good news was that their immune regulation was improving at the same time. So 2 major improvements of the immune system just after a combined lifestyle intervention. So we thought that might be a weapon, and at the same time with Daan de Vrel and Douwe Atsma and Hanno Paul, amongst others from the LUMC, We did a study and review on which factor contribute to obesity, and we saw that all the healthy lifestyle factors are beneficial for obesity, but also for the immune system. And the other way around, we found it for that all the unhealthy lifestyle factors were a negative effect, not only on weight, but also directly on the immune system. So these studies, we thought, well, it's really important that the Minister of Health should know about it. So we wrote a letter which was supported by more than 300 healthcare organizations at director level, but also more than 3,000 healthcare professionals, published also on this website. It was also covered by the media. The letter we sent to Hugo de Jonge and the other the Ministry of Health, and actually mentioned also in his press conference. And nowadays we are working on a better national prevention agreement, so more measures for primary prevention. We really have to take care not any more people are developing obesity, so the tap should be closed, but the bath is still full. So for those who already have overweight or obesity, we need more lifestyle campaigns, but also better treatments. So combined lifestyle interventions, but also pharmacotherapy, or sometimes bariatric surgery. This is the result. There are many websites you can find with some things you can do in corona times. Here you see the new lifestyle campaign, fitopjouwmanier.nl, by the Ministry of Health. And there will be much more about it, because it's not only about COVID. Of course, it's very important to prevent other pandemics, but also other comorbidities. So, as I mentioned, sometimes lifestyle is not effective enough and you need pharmacotherapy as add-on the lifestyle intervention. We have these two medications since last year on the market in the Netherlands, and they're addressing the GLP-1 pathway to the brain and decreasing your appetite, and also, for example, anti-inflammatory effects. And the naltrexone bupropion is more affecting the hedonic system, also decreasing appetite, and via other mechanisms. They are on average pretty effective in that sense that 2/3 has about 5% weight loss for the liraglutide, and for the naltrexone bupropion, we have about more than half has 5% weight loss, which is important for reaching health goals. And in future, we expect next year that the semaglutide will be approved in Europe as well for obesity. And there we see, even in 1/3 of the people, we see 20% of weight loss. So there's way more to come, although it's not reimbursed. And if the BMI is really high, sometimes bariatric surgery is also needed for weight loss. So to conclude, fat is an active organ, and it's good to realize obesity is a complex and chronic relapsing disease, lead to more than 200 complications, also disturbed hormonal immune system, and just 5% of weight loss by lifestyle intervention can already show significant improvements in patients with obesity, might be a good weapon also for other viral pandemics like COVID or in the future. So this is a short thanks to my clinical and research team of the Obesity Center CTG. And if you want to know more about obesity in general, how your fat mass is working, one of the organizers was co-authored together with me writing the book Vet Belangrijk, or in English, Fat the Secret Organ. And there's many more we explain here about how fat is working and how the biological clock is affecting it, and brown adipose tissue and other things. So thank you very much for your attention, and maybe there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisbeth, for this very interesting presentation, and especially the link with the COVID pandemic at the moment. We know the chat function is not working properly, but somehow Christian managed to pose a question, and that is, what is the role of the microbiome in obesity?
Well, there's a lot known, because we know that, for example, processed food is affecting the microbiome for a part. It's also, we know that it contributes to the chronic inflammation. So one of the things is that the chronic inflammation is important in the whole signaling also between fat mass and the brain. And we see that also the mental factors and the brain, not only food regulation, metabolism regulation, is being disturbed by inflammation at a hypothalamic level, but also, for example, mood disorders like the hippocampus, the amygdala, important for memory and mood. and they also get sort of inflamed. And we know that the gut microbiome is really important, and that, for example, the food intake and the type of food is affecting it, but also use of antibiotics. And so you can influence it and disturb it by many other things. Probably also other medication can disturb the microbiome. But we know processed food is one of the factors which affects it. And it's one of the major factors in this whole cascade, which is, there's so much more to tell about this topic, but microbiome is an important factor.
Thank you very much, Liesbeth. I know there are more questions, but for the sake of time, I think we must go on. Thank you.
Our next speaker, and also our last speaker, will be Nathalie Ries-Ottenheim. She's a psychiatrist and senior researcher at the LUMC. Her research focuses on depression, anxiety disorders, and also prevention studies in the context of psychiatry, including on a healthy diet. She has recently developed the app Digital Stress Body, for which she recently received a grant from ZonMW Care for Innovation to implement the stress body also outside of this hospital. And she will tell everything about this stress body during her talk. I'm very curious. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very honored to close this excellent seminar on prevention. My talk will be somewhat different of the previous talks because it's focused on prevention of mental health problems and fostering resilience in healthcare workers. Our story begins in March 2020, at the beginning of the corona crisis. There was a necessity to support the colleagues working at the front line of the COVID-19 care. So we put together a group of social workers, psychologists, and psychiatrists to support our colleagues. And what we noticed is that these healthcare professionals were very resilient, but they were exposed to a series of adverse events, like families who were in distress, patients who were in distress because, for example, they couldn't have any visits, but also the social isolation at the beginning because of the restrictions of COVID, the high workload, and at the beginning also the uncertainty of the disease itself. The treatment was uncertain, but also there was a big fear of contagion at that time, and also a lot of concerns about the availability of protective equipment. So most of our colleagues navigated the first wave of the corona crisis on autopilot. They did what they had to do, and they did their duty, but it didn't really reflect on the emotions they were feeling. So it was when the number of admitted patients decreased that there was more room for reflection and for the question, what have we been through in the last period? And as a nurse of the ICU told me, they went through this period in a haste. They didn't really realize what was happening to them, and it all became just about COVID and nothing else. And she told me, well, there was a way to go through this first period, this first peak, but it isn't a really sustainable mechanism to go on. And she was certainly right. So we faced a challenge of supporting our colleagues, and we were looking for an inspiration source. And so we started looking out of the box, out of the hospital, which other professions do actually face this kind of crisis and how do they cope with them. So we found a high parallelism with the military, who are also exposed to long periods of stress during their abroad missions. And in the military, they have focused on also recovering. They actually have an in-between station. When ending this abroad mission, they go to an in-between country, and then they have debriefing, and they also start a buddy system, which tries to encourage to signal this stress symptoms and to have support from peers. So we thought that's a very good model to apply in our hospital. So we developed a vision on prevention of mental health problems and coaching. So our support team was based on 3 key points. The first one was accurate information. People had to know what was the course of the pandemic, the number of admitted patients, what was the availability of protective equipment, because that gave them a sense of control of the situation. The second intervention was coaching on site. So we went to the departments where this COVID care was given. We went to the ICU, we went to the emergency room and to the court departments. And we did their coaching on site, which is different from the briefing. We just reflected on the shifts and we normalized their emotions, because stress is actually a very normal reaction. And lastly, but not least, we try to implement also this buddy system, which we had seen in the military worked so well. So we assigned a buddy to every nurse, and at the end of the shift, we reflected on how was the shift. Did you notice any stress signals? How are you going home? But we faced also a couple of challenges in this prevention program. The first one was how to reach everyone, because, for example, nurses work in different shifts and also do doctors, and most of the nurses just wanted to go home at the end of their shift, so we didn't reach everyone during our coaching sessions. And very important also is the shame and stigma there is on mental health problems. And I'm not talking about a full-blown depression, because these people were just working, they were not dysfunctioning, but talking about things like having sleeping problem, and being more irritable with family, for example. Because as in the military, also healthcare professionals are trained in a culture of thriving. They see it as weak to admit that they have stress or that they have sleeping problems or nightmares about what they've been through. So we had to think about how can we reach as many people as possible and how can we overcome stigma. So we added a new tool to our support team, and that was the digital stress buddy. It was based on the same principle of the buddy system I talked to you about, but we overcame the problem of not reaching everyone by making an application which was really giving a mirror of what are you feeling, what are your stress signals, what's your resilience. So this application was freely available on the is still freely available on the Android and Apple stores, and also in a web-based version. And how does this application look like? Well, there is first an interface in which the user gives some very limited information on their profile, what kind of profession they have, if they work on a COVID ward, yes or no, if they are, for example, just working from home, and they fill in a couple of questionnaires that reflect on stress and resilience factor, but also questionnaires that are validated, for example, for scoring for burnout or depression or post-traumatic stress disorder. When filling these questionnaires, they get a score based on their stress levels and get personalized advice on how to cope and which routes they have to follow to have access to psychological consultation. And also, depending on the stress scores, they also get personalized advice, and every time another advice. So, for example, don't read a lot of information about COVID on social media, try to go outside, try to get some physical activity. So today I want to share with you the first results. By now, after 1 year of using the stress buddy, we have 1,431 users of the app, and the mean visits are 1.8 to 2. 30% of our users are teleworking, and 70% are really working on the floor here at the hospital. And of those, 30% are medical doctors and 70% nurses. And despite what you would think, now that the vaccination rate is increasing, the mental health complaints are also increasing. That it's not like now that the number of admitted patients is decreasing, that the mental health problems are also fading away. As you see in this graph, for the resilience line, there is a decrease of resilience since the beginning of the corona crisis last year. And instead, the burnout complaints, the impact of stress due to traumatic events, and the depression scores are increasing even now when the admitted patients are decreasing in our hospital. So what are the main risk factors for developing stress symptoms? Well, we see that at the beginning of the corona crisis, the support of management, support from home, and support from colleagues was one of the factors that actually improved the stress symptoms, but now it's actually decreasing. The users of the app actually report that they experience a lower support from home, a lower support from their management, that also increases their stress levels. And on the other hand, we see that factors such as the fear of contagion, or the unclarity on the task, or the overwork were actually very big risk factors at the beginning of the corona crisis, but now they are not actually giving more stress than at the beginning. So that has actually improved. Well, what's next? Because, well, there is still, the coronavirus is still out there. There are dreaded variants of the coronavirus that are actually an issue of concern. And also another very important issue in healthcare is that not only the treatment of the patients with coronavirus is important, but also all the treatments that have been postponed until now. These patients are actually knocking on our doors. They need our help, but the healthcare professionals are physically and also mentally exhausted, and may also suffer the long-term effects caused by this pandemic. And the stress buddy, the data from the stress buddy support this notion, but it's also in line with a recent survey that was conducted by the Federation of Medical Specialists and Federation of Nurses that reported that in about 7,000 healthcare professionals who were asked, there were in 60% of them reported mental health problems. So it's actually a problem that is still there. It is still there, and it needs attention. It's not like now that the number of admitted patients is decreasing, the problem fades away. So what are our future plans? Well, what we would like to do is to make a more personalized coaching with the data we get of the app. We would like also to engage more colleagues in using the app and also on the long term, so we can analyze trajectories of symptoms, but also which factors are actually giving more stress or fostering resilience. So in this regard, we consider gamification, for example, as a tool to promote the use of the app on the long term. And we also want to extend the use of the app outside the hospital, for example, in nursing homes or at the GP practices. We are actually using there's a laboratorium in Rotterdam that is actually using the app, and also the UMCG, and we are also having some conversations with nursing homes to implement the app also outside the hospital. But this app is also applicable to patients. For example, you could use this app to measure stress and resilience in patients that are under stressful circumstances. So I think this app is applicable for a larger field and a larger group of people. But for now, we hope to use this information to improve the working conditions of healthcare workers and to give them a good coaching also after the last week of the coronavirus. I would like to thank you for your attention, and also I want to thank all the users of the app and all the coaches who are still going to the wards. And this was the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. Very interesting, not only to focus on stress in patients, but in health professionals this time. I have a question for my understanding. What I did not understand correctly is you said that users on average used it 1.8 to 2 times, but you also had a lot of measurement points over time. How can you explain, probably?
Yes, because there were, I think, I will search. I think you mean this graph. Actually, you can see this because the app was used actually by different groups of people at every measurement time. You could say that this is an aggregation of cross-sectional data over time.
Okay, thank you. There is a question from the audience from Xanyu Song. What is the potential reason that most users are nurses?
I think this twofold. The first place is because we did a coaching on the wards, and there we reached foremost the nurses, but there is also I think a higher stigma among the medical doctors to actually accept that they are having stress symptoms than among the nurses. Nurses talk much more with each other, and medical doctors do also, but it's, well, more an individual type of work.
Okay, thank you. And I was also wondering if on average you see that the stress levels increase with time, but did the users have the perception that the app had a positive impact on their symptoms?
Yes, what they reported to me in coaching sessions when we asked them how they experience the use of the app is that it gave them more insight in how they were feeling, why they were so irritable with their children, for example. And that it didn't mean that they were dysfunctioning at that point, but it gave them the insight to do something about it, to have an extra conversation with a coach on the ward. So they perceive it as beneficial in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Jorrit Meesters asks, besides the use in patient, it also appears very useful for caregivers or next of kin. What do you think about that suggestion?
Yes, I work myself as a psychiatry at the hospital with dementia patients, for example, and I think this is a very useful application also for the caregivers of patients with dementia, for example.
Okay, thank you. I think I will now give the floor to my co-chair.
Yes, so I think we have come to the end of this very nice seminar now. I'd like to thank all the speakers for taking the effort to present such a nice overview of their work. I'd like to thank you for your attention, for the interaction as well, although there were some difficulties with the chat, of course. And the last thing I'd like to mention is that within approximately a week, all the people that registered for the seminar will receive an email from our research team, and you can, it's completely if you want it or not, but you can sign up if you want to join our research team. And if you join, you can receive email about news, about meetings we organize. So that's completely up to you. So we hope many of you will sign up. So with that, I'd like to close this session. Thanks again, and have a nice evening.